So, hello everyone. Welcome to this week's installment of ClueCon Weekly. This week, to join us for a quick interview is Kristian Kielhofner from Tovera, an upcoming startup working on digital asset verification. And he's got a very long resume and has done a lot of interesting things in his life. So, thank you, Kristian, for joining us today. And we'd like to give us a quick introduction, or as quick as you can make it, considering
Sure,
what you have on there.
sure. So, fortunately or unfortunately, Brian West had just joined us, and he had to drop off. But certainly my career experience, my open source experience, a large portion of my professional network and social network extends to the OGs of telecom, even pre free switch era. So, back to Asterisk, the first Astracon in 2004, when Brian, Tony, and Mike and everybody were working primarily on Asterisk and kind of before even the genesis of FreeSwitch.
Nice, cool. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I've joined. I'm a little late to the party as having joined Voice and the open source world around 2009. I was working at a large consulting company before, one of the unnamed ones that make you wear ties and go to customer sites. And I'm
Real,
happier now.
real, real, real buttoned up. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So and so before we go into your current endeavor, which sounds super interesting to me because of various reasons, including personal interest, you're mostly known for Star to Star because anybody who knows your name instantly thinks of Star to Star.
Yep.
For a few people who don't know that company, could you give us some background on what you were doing there and what it was born out of and the history of the company?
Sure. It's actually a very, very similar time frame to what I was just describing with, kind of 2004 and that whole era. What really happened here was I kind of had, sort of a concept that came to mind in that I was actually working on two separate projects. I was working on kind of a, hardware VPN appliance, which was Socorus boards at the time. This is how long ago that was, and there was some kind of embedded Linux work that was associated with that. And then meanwhile on the side, I thought, well, this asterisk thing and kind of using general purpose hardware and sort of PC hardware for telephony seems really interesting and something that might go somewhere. So I essentially took asterisk, had cross compiled it and created a very small embedded Linux distribution called Ast
Wow.
Linux, which is kind of the real original OG thing when I sort of showed up on the scene, for lack of a better term. And after spending almost 2 years really working with consulting and community feedback and additional open source work, I met one of my co-founders at Star to Star actually at Astracon in Anaheim in 2005. And I believe that was maybe October of 2005 or so. And next thing I knew, I'd moved across the country within 3 months, and met our other co-founder, and we started Star to Star in early 2006.
Oh, that's and then you've been doing a lot of telephony stuff up until 2017, I would say, and
Mm-hmm.
then you've been doing some different stuff. Well, leads us into your current company, which I think you're founder and CEO of Tovera, which is first of all, this sounds completely different from what you've been doing so far.
It,
So
it is. It's funny. It's funny you mention. Timing was kind of interesting on this. So by the time 2017 had rolled around, I kind of got to a point where I'd reached sort of my lifetime quota of time in Wireshark and SIP traces and WebRTC and negotiation and SDPs and all of the alphabet soup that we're all at least somewhat familiar with, right? So I sort of thought, oh, I just can't do this. So
I
I
can't even.
sorry.
I can't even. Like
Oh,
that's
just I
I.
can't even. Yeah. So I resigned from Star to Star and spent this is 2017, so you nailed the timeline there. And I spent a couple of years after having been involved in not one but two high growth, very intense startups. I took a couple of years sabbatical, semi-retirement, whatever you'd want to call it, just kind of looking around and playing around and just sort of getting back to my roots of, loving all things nerdy and all things technology. And it was sort of part of that exploration that led to now Tovera in 2021.
Hmm. So that's yeah. You distance yourself a little from the voice over IP world and ended up doing something else, which I didn't spoil on purpose. Only just as a quick introduction. So, what does Devera do, and why is it not voice over IP?
I have a funny, something like funny and kind of not funny Genesis story here. So the announcement of the Star2Star acquisition by Sangoma was in January. So I knew, okay, it's within the close of this transaction, I'll be kind of officially unencumbered by, what's going on here, and I can probably finally kind of close the chapter on VoIP and real-time communications and such. And as luck and timing would have it, I'm not sure if you caught this story, but in mid-March, there was a story that got some national prominence here in the U.S. of a mother in her mid-50s who generated deep fake videos of her 16-year-old daughter's cheerleading rivals in an attempt to get them booted off of a cheerleading squad so that her daughter would have, yeah, right, the facial expressions say it all, so that her daughter would have better chances of placement on a high school teenager cheerleading squad. And some of these deepfake videos were just beyond the pale. I mean, we're talking, drug use and nudity.
Russian spies will not go to that extent, but
Oh, I mean, right, yeah.
cheerleading mother will.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about a woman in her mid 1950s who was taking a page straight out of Compromat, right? And
Yeah.
but with deepfakes, exactly. So I saw this story, and kind of in one of the things I was looking into in this sort of a few years of downtime in this kind of exploration was, of course, machine learning, the the prominence of high quality deepfakes that started to emerge in maybe 2019, some of the famous Tom Cruise ones and those things. And my thinking was in that era, well, if you're a computer science PhD and you have, your day jobs at Facebook or Google or wherever, and you have access to, potentially millions of dollars of NVIDIA compute, and you have expertise in this era, well, yeah, it would make sense that you could generate deepfakes, right? And when I saw this story with this, let's call it, over involved, mother in her daughter's cheerleading career, this was kind of one of these genesis moments where I realized this is beginning to become available and accessible to anyone. We're probably at a point here where, very, very, very soon, if not already, depending on your definition of deep fakes, where between the advances in compute, the underlying technology, the software, of course, integration with cloud services, we're approaching a day where anyone can, on their iPhone, download some app off of the App Store and generate a highly believable, if not distinguishable, deep fake video of anyone doing or saying anything. So that was the concern, and that was sort of the moment of, wow, I think there's something really important here from a timing perspective that we need to take some sort of technology-based approach into addressing this issue before it reaches epidemic proportions.
And I think there was a time about last year where deep fakes were at their height. Like I was seeing things going on left and right. Then somehow died down a little. I think it has something to do with people starting to take countermeasures.
Yeah, there's been sort of a natural ebb and flow to it, and to your point, most of the deep fakes that people have been exposed to are comedic value, or would probably be called parodies, and even legally protected under those definitions. But part of this ebb and flow, to your point, has been what has emerged as essentially an arms race or cat mouse game of essentially new generation model, new detection model, new generation model, new detection model. And you can even go and you can look through the scientific literature or various positions from Facebook, Microsoft Research, Google, et cetera, where there's an acknowledgement that we're in a period of time where there is this arms race, and it is this, publish a paper with a new generation model, a month later publish a paper with the detection model for that generation model. And one of the things I think that's often lost in popular discourse is that anything that's machine learning really comes down to probability, not certainty. So it's another area where, as you investigate the literature a little bit more, and even some of the practical implementations and such, from a detection standpoint, the current state of the art detection model can maybe get in the 80% probability range, which, I look at this and maybe, sometimes the dramatic examples are the best examples. Looking at that of, if this were a potentially deep faked video of somebody, committing a heinous crime, and it came down to, well, there's 80% certainty that this video is fake or real. I would imagine that, for a lot of, average people sitting on a jury, that if nothing else, that is the difference between, somebody being wrongly convicted and a potentially guilty person going free. So, even with this state of the art and this 80% probability, what you'll frequently see in kind of the CS community that specializes in this technology is there's a general acknowledgement that on a long enough timeline, the generation models will win, which makes it even scarier, right? And so I started looking at this problem essentially from the other side of the coin, where I thought, well, maybe what we should be doing is not necessarily trying to detect what is fake. We should be proving what is real. And that was, kind of the genesis of Tovera and what I'm spending all of my time doing today.
Which might be actually easier now that I think of it, or at least make more sense.
That was exactly it. I looked at this and I thought, well, maybe instead, I kind of view, excuse me, ML is, a little, it's rapidly advancing, but it's kind of heavy hitting for a variety of reasons, right? And you kind of see it shoehorned into a lot of things. Well, maybe it doesn't really belong there. But from a authentication and verification standpoint, I'm, essentially able to stand on the shoulders of giants of cryptographic authentication, hashing, potentially even a certificate-based approach where
Yeah.
we all know and acknowledge that this is essentially 100% secure. And anybody that's ever gone to bankofamerica.com in their browser and the address bar goes green, right? That, this is a battle tested, hardened implementation that everyone can have faith in.
That's pretty interesting. So, uh, what you're doing is very effectively is asset origin verification. Can we explain that maybe with a couple examples so people who are more used to telephony can get the gist what's happening?
Sure. Yeah. So, from a high level, the concept that I've sort of been describing it's essentially the cryptographic security and authentication of bankofamerica.com address bar goes green, combined with the Twitter blue check mark. So it's
Oh,
essential. Yeah, right. So it's essentially not only has this media not verified from the time it's been released, it's directly attributable to the organization, the person, whoever that it's been signed as. So it's a case of whether you're Kim Kardashian or Joe Biden or whoever, you're able to say, well, this media that we've released to the world, whatever that media may be, has not only been modified if it's verified and authenticated by Tovera, it is actually from me, as opposed to a modification of media that maybe I did release, or outright generated media, or even a highly edited version of media that I'd released, etc. So that's the bankofamerica.com address bar goes green, Twitter blue check mark is kind of the way to describe the overall concept and implementation.
Very, very interesting. So, I happen to be sort of a cryptographer. I wouldn't say expert, but I know my way around cryptography very well, but blockchain concepts and
Mm-hmm.
actual crypto encryption,
Right.
that kind of stuff. But what's the layman's version of how Tovera works? Because your
Sure.
website has a good explanation that has EPFS, which I know what it is, and various other
Yep.
things, but
Yep. So, this is one of these I tend to, as my kind of backstory would communicate, right? I tend to just really dive into things. So over the span of, a month after sort of hearing this story and having this light bulb moment, I realized that there are a lot of interesting, not necessarily technical issues that are associated with this. You've got a chicken egg problem of, oh, how do you take this? We'll just start with a JPEG, for example. How do you take this image and in a user-friendly, accessible way that's compatible with the way that this media is shared and consumed online or really anywhere? How do you somehow make that identifiable as being Tovera signed and authenticated? And then, oh, by the way, how do you do that verification? So it's in a telephony sort of comparison. It's very similar to Metcalfe's law and the power of network effects, and the old famous story of you know Alexander Graham Bell has a telephone, but he needs to at least be able to call Mr. Watson, right? And so it goes from being a completely useless device and implementation to, well, now you can at least talk to one person. And of course, now we're at a stage where Metcalfe's law is just kind of completely shown itself, and communications and telephony is ubiquitous. So there's some other kind of interesting sort of network effects at play. But from a high level, or I'll try to keep it high. I tend to dive right into the weeds, right? We take this image, and our implementation will reach out to our API and generate a completely unique identifier that's at this point not even associated with the creator or the media in any way. We then take that identifier, we embed it in the metadata of the image, and then we generate a SHA-256 checksum of the entire image with the metadata identifier embedded in it. We then go back to the API and we create a record of that association. And there are some additional parameters that can be specified there, and there's some other things, but I'll just kind of skip over that for now. So now that image, wherever it's consumed, if our client implementation, which is an embed for easy social media sharing, it can be included in an iframe. We're working on a JavaScript library that can be included in any site, mobile applications, browser extensions, all of these things that essentially serve as clients to do this verification at the point of media consumption. So now when this image is viewed anywhere, our client implementations will detect that unique identifier. They reach out to our API. They get that original SHA-256 checksum back. They compare it to the checksum of the image that is essentially directly in front of the person's eyeballs. And if the signature matches, we know that that media hasn't been modified. And oh, by the way, within that API call for verification, we return the user's information if they've selected for it to be viewable, and potentially additional metadata and branding and marketing and potential monetization tools that are associated with that particular image or asset.
Yeah, for people who are not familiar with the whole process, I would say that you seem to have solved brilliantly one problem, which is generally when you're talking about cryptography and checksumming, hashing, storing hashes, whatever. So proving a document exists at a given moment in time and in that form, very often the problem is with verification, especially verification as in giving users a way to
Mhm.
actually be able to verify that without having a CS degree. Because I have no problems verifying a checksum, literally just sitting down and even writing some code if needed. But say my father, I always have is an example. Poor dad is, I mean, is an electrical engineer, so is from the old school, never really work with computers more much. So getting that to, so how does someone who has no technology skills make sure that what you're saying is actually true? And you seem to have solved that brilliantly with an app, an API, which has been the key missing part for a while. Because to be fair, way to store a hash has been there for a while. Like, every time you
Mhm.
download
Oh,
a package
yeah.
from Debian, it's getting checked by a checksum. But the verification is the problem. So I feel like you found a very good solution, and I mean, congratulations. It's
Thank
very
you.
smart,
Thank
and
you.
it's actually super interesting. And
Yeah.
again, that's very often the problem.
Yeah, and I tend to, by the way, I really appreciate that recognition, and tend to kind of even going back to Ask Linux, right? It's I identified very early on, I'm not a Tony. I'm not going to be implementing some unbelievably complicated, world-changing technology from more or less scratch. Where oh wow, excuse me, what I've identified is that my skills really lie in essentially doing remixes is really the way I would look at it. It's like I'm not Mozart from a composition angle. I'm a EDM DJ that's making mashups is essentially what's happening here. So whether it's Ask Linux or sort of combining in a new and novel and somewhat unique way these existing proven technologies, Tovera is essentially another version of that. I joke now to kind of undersell it. Of at this point, we're not doing computer science. I mean, this is an interesting combination of tried and proven technologies that are being applied in a new way to address a problem.
That's I mean, it is really I feel much the same way. As a solutions architect at SignalWire and my previous life as a consultant in the voice over IP business, I've almost always been a remixer too. Like, we build platforms out of parts that are built by the Tonys of the world. So that really
Right.
resonates with me. I feel like I know where that's coming from. And we it's a good place to be in, because you get to learn a lot of different things. You get to think about complex problems and how to solve them. What's out there is really interesting. I do have a question about right now, we up to now we discussed assets such as images, but there's a
Mhm.
couple questions that come to mind. One of the earliest customers of SignalWire's video SDK is a company named Agree that does digital signatures online through video. So there is a complicated European law that allows you to do effectively signatures are valid by law by going through a video process, because you have to be recognized by someone that's live on the other end. So that
Mhm.
said, do you think you could use the Tovera technology to store a signed contract? So say me and you sign something as in a digital signature. Will that
Mhm.
be the a good use case for Tovera too?
So this is kind of another thing that I really appreciate about this hash based approach, in that you and I know, and many of the viewers may know, SHA-256 can hash anything, any
Whatever.
number
Yeah.
of bytes or data. It applies universally to anything. So the foundational technology can be applied to any data anywhere. And at least in our current approach, the kind of current limiting factor is how we're doing the embedding of the unique identifier. So right now we're using an Adobe standard called XMP for images. And as we sort of evolve in the development and capability of the technology, we're investigating potentially universally generic ways to embed the identifier, or greater platform support for supporting additional metadata standards on a kind of per file type basis.
So yeah, so it will be possible to integrate with signatures, and I'm asking because I will actually tell those guys to get in touch with you.
Oh, great, great. Thank you.
It's going to be very very interesting. Yeah, I think the hash approach coupled with using a public blockchain as a notary of sorts is really really interesting. What's fun that your website states, and it's funny to say, is that not even Tovera can change the record after it's been stored.
Exactly. Yeah. So, as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, well, a lot of the, say like voice over IP real time communications technology, knows that, I'm more or less legit and, not a shady person or whatever else. And, but, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, well, at the end of the day, why should you trust us? What's to stop us from fiddling with a backend database somewhere? Or, again, I'm a big fan of extreme examples. A government or, potential criminal organization or some combination of both coming up to me with guns and saying, well, you're going to go in the back end and you're going to change these records. So kind of anywhere on that spectrum, I thought that, the approach of sort of, the publicly available and auditable and verifiable, and also immutable, completely outside of my control or anyone else's control, application of blockchain technology is actually a perfect fit for what we're doing. So it's a case where whether you are a much more technical user or a security researcher or really anyone else, you can take any or all of our signed assets or some sample size or whatever, and pretty easily pull records from blockchain, get the identifiers, the SHAs that are associated with them, and write your own straightforward client implementation to generate your local checksums, compare them to the immutable blockchain record. Sure enough, nothing has changed. Everything matches perfectly, and so on, and on and on and on. So, I thought that this is, in some respects, kind of a very 2021 company of addressing, right, potential kind of machine learning related technologies and those approaches with a fundamentally blockchain based solution.
So that leads into, well, just a remark. I've worked and spoke to people who were doing supply chain based blockchain tracking, right? So they were trying to
Mm.
track the origin of some goods through the various steps of the chain. And one thing I noticed is that they had implemented a blockchain solution based on a private blockchain consisting of
Mhm.
only one company.
Yep. Yep.
And that's really not how it works, because you're able to rewrite history at any point just by
Mhm.
literally replaying events. Say you want to omit that you received the shipment of that was for grocery. So you
Exactly.
want to admit you received a shipment of carrots from Chile because they were not good, or they were contaminated by something or whatever. They were not,
Mhm.
organic. And what you just do is just remove that record from the database and rerun the entire blockchain.
Yeah, recalculate all the nonces, right? And it's as if it never existed.
It never
Uh,
existed.
right.
So,
So in this, kind of in this deep dive, this obsessive deep dive of which I'm, known to do, I identified actually a very similar project. So Walmart did a Hyperledger Fabric implementation where it was private blockchain ledger based and actually used to track groceries, interestingly enough. And, I realized there are advantages with that in terms of, scalability, control, various other factors, but it's also sort of, an antithesis to the idea of blockchain in general. And you sort of look at that and go, well, at this point, why don't you just have a key value store or a database or something? I mean, what's really the difference, right?
yeah, there's a saying in Italy that could be translated to, "Hey, bartender, is the wine good?" Which sort of fits perfectly here. Like, if it's your own blockchain and you always have the ability to rewrite history, then it's as good as a database, in my opinion, honestly.
Sure, sure. So there was, we certainly had recognition of that. And, that's why for our blockchain implementation, it's a very, very, straightforward, at least in my perspective. It's a Web3 API interface to one of many well-known sort of chain access providers, and we use all of the same public chains, the usual suspects that you would see anywhere within the broader blockchain space, where we don't even run a local node, let alone have control over all of the nodes that make up that
Oh,
blockchain.
nice. So you're just using Web3?
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, wow, that's nice.
Yeah. It's like another sort of common theme in my career is these arguably overcomplicated architected Rube Goldberg machines where there's all these moving parts. And part of, at least in my experience, actually pulling that off is kind of identifying where you can kind of innovate and add value, and also sort of identifying, well, what should we really be getting into and building at this stage, and what makes sense to spend our very limited time on. And this was a case where there's a robust ecosystem of IPFS gateway providers, companies that do IPFS pinning for those records, Web3 providers that make access to to various blockchains, very simple, highly scalable, extremely reliable. And I thought, well, like we've got enough interesting stuff to do, considering this company has existed for 6 months. Being able to leverage large Web3 providers to provide blockchain access definitely seems like the way to go.
Yeah, that's so out of curiosity, which are your main blockchains you're operating on? Just curious. Ethereum for sure because it's IPFS, and what else?
You're right. So all of the kind of the blockchain specifics are in some way related to Ethereum. So it's EVM compatible, Solidity based, ERC 721 for smart contracts, excuse me. And so at that point, as you well know, it's essentially like, well, what do we want to hold, tokens on to pay gas fees, and
Yeah,
what chain do we want to deploy to? And other than that, it almost kind of doesn't matter, right? As far as the implementation knows. So we actually, from the very very beginning, have ready support in all of the systems, and the back ends, and any of the kind of key value store things that we're doing to support any number of blockchains, whether it's Ethereum, various test nets, layer 2 solutions that are now emerging. We can even dynamically essentially select a given blockchain to add a record to, and know
nice.
that that's the blockchain that's associated with this particular record.
That's so I if I have to be honest, this approach resonates with me a lot, and I feel like it's better and it's gonna would be the go-to for the entire industry instead of NFTs for various reasons, which I
Well, our approach is essentially, the goal, and these are these big thinking startup moonshots, but the goal is the underwriter's laboratory, the good housekeeping seal of approval, the kind of the seal for all digital media content verification and provenance everywhere. Any social network. Actually, it relates to NFTs in that we've identified certainly some issues and weaknesses in potential NFT and fraud and theft, in that today you may be fairly well known as Board Ape Yacht Club or whatever, and you're on OpenSea, and they've started to do kind of a version of a Twitter blue check mark as well. But what's to stop you from not only committing kind of fraud and copyright infringement, but ripping off investors by setting up your own shop on a different chain or a different marketplace and just copying all of the images and the assets and listing them wherever you want, where payment goes to your wallet, not the actual
yeah.
content creator. So this is a case where we're positioning ourselves and working on the implementation to be a universal cross marketplace, cross chain source of truth, even in the NFT space, as an additional layer of independent authentication and verification to protect not only content creators from some of the fraud that's beginning to run rampant, but also consumers and investors, where you know, you at the end of the day really to know, without doing your own research and due diligence, that you're buying the actual genuine article, not unlike any other piece of art or creative work.
Yeah, that's the way forward. I mean, there's a lot of things happening. I can see this even bleeding into voice over IP with CDRs, that kind of thing, cross provider accounting, such as finding out. So, as you know, providers, the level 3 and stuff like that, they trade traffic all the time, and they have to
Mm-hmm.
reconcile at the end of the month or the year with
Yep.
immense complexity. And sometimes they're just going to forfeit mode. I'm just going to give you 1 million, and we're going to call it even, because otherwise it's hard to figure out. I can see that happening in the sense that you can finally track things in a way that is also neutral. Nobody really owns it, so you always know that it can be adjusted. Nobody has changed it. It's very, very interesting. Well, looking forward to your talk at ClueCon. It's going to be interesting. I hope to let me into the country. It's still up in the air, because unfortunately a travel ban expires on November 1st, which is the week right after. But
Oh,
I might be able to get a special visa before that. Still crossing fingers. I have a week or so before I have to make a call. So we'll see what happens.
well, yeah.
And well,
Interestingly enough, I actually I live maybe 35 miles from Tony in Wisconsin, and so for us, all we have to do is make sure that the Wisconsin people and Illinois people can get along well enough to for them to let us just barely across the border and get into Chicago.
yeah, that's true. I mean, it's a little bit harder. I used to come to the US a lot more, of course, and now we're still figuring things out.
Mm.
Well, we'll see how things go forward. Well, so first of all, thank you very much for joining us today, Kristian. It was a super interesting chat. We went off looking at what a blockchain authentication solution could be, what Devera does. A little bit of history always helps.
Well, thank you, Luca, and it's of course it's been great to be here.
And well, then I'll see you all next week. And thank you, Kristian, again.
All right, thank you.